Hi, welcome to today's edition of History Homeschool at the Heyward House in Bluffton, South Carolina. Today we're going to talk about our detached summer kitchen. Summer kitchens were typically detached because of fire and heat. You'll notice the structure has 4 openings. Those openings are to maximize airflow and minimize the heat inside the structure. But you can imagine during the summer, even without a fire going, it's very hot in there. Before we step inside, we're going to go over to our herb garden. Typically, a place in Bluffton would have had an herb garden. An herb garden would have consisted of kitchen herbs and medicinal herbs. There is overlap between some herbs such as lavender and peppermint. Most of the food that they would have eaten would have come from their plantation, which was about 10 miles from here. We're going to step inside the summer kitchen. When you look around the summer kitchen, you'll notice that quite a few items are what we use today. People have mandolins they use for slicing tomatoes, cabbage. There are ricers. Most people don't use this today. This is a butter churn. One of our most unique items is a rice pestle. Now, most of the rice pestles I've seen are 2 or 3 times this length. Rice pestles were used to separate the rice from the hulls after it was harvested. Another item, something most people use daily. Do you know what this is? It's a pepper mill. Besides cooking in here, they also ironed. This is called a fluter. Both sections of the fluter was heated. The cloth was laid down. It was then rolled so you could make a pleat for the collar, or a fluted collar. You've probably seen photos of men, typically with the collars that were ruffled. Those are called fluted collars. Now in the summer kitchen, we also have other items for daily use. Ice tongs. Ice was typically shipped from up north. It was covered in sawdust, shipped down. Many plantations had an ice house, or general stores had an ice house. Ice houses were typically built along the river so they could channel river water through them to keep it cooler. Sometimes a structure would have an ice house on one side and a dairy on the other. We also have a dry sink. They did not have running water, so the enslaved would have fetched the water, brought it in, and washed here. The hole leads down to a bucket underneath where the water could drain, and then eventually the water was reused or tossed out. One of our other items is a press. Presses typically had multiple attachments, so you could use them for lard or apples. One of our more popular items is this Waffle Maker. Now as you look around the kitchen, you'll see some of these are from the early to mid 1800s, and we have some newer items into the early 1900s. We have an apple core. This would have usually been on a table. A muffin pan. The muffin pan has bears in different poses. And when you look at this, you may think this is an ice cream maker. It is actually a dough maker. There are instructions on the lid. However, if you're working in the kitchen and you're not part of the family, do you think you would have been able to read? So they would have just learned how to use it from someone else. Visitors often think this is a meat grinder. This is a cherry stoner. For many of the items in here, you can get on YouTube and see how these function. This is a lamb mold. It was a mold for butter or for chocolate. A cauldron like this typically would have just been kept outside. Inside, we have a laundry agitator. Back then, they did not have modern washing machines, and so laundry was washed by hand. As we mentioned in the slave cabin segment, these structures were originally built with mortise and tenon joinery. In these images, you can see the wooden pegs. Now, the summer kitchen was, as I mentioned earlier, never attached to the house, but it was closer than its current location. It was moved back here when they added the modern kitchen to the Heyward House in the 1930s. After it was moved back here, it was used as storage. Eventually, beetles damaged it, and about 10 years ago, we reconstructed it using some modern wood. But we were able to salvage some of the original wood we have put up in the ceiling, and some of the posts are original. Now, these rafters were a good place to hang herbs. So as they needed herbs and they matured, they would cut them and dry them in here. Shake shingle roofs were typical during the 1800s. As you can see from our summer kitchen roof, it needs to be replaced. We will be replacing it. They only last about 10 years, whereas a metal roof like the one on the Heyward House can last up to 100 years. Thank you for watching today's edition on the summer kitchen for the History Homeschool at the Heyward House in Bluffton, South Carolina.